There we are. All right, well, good morning, everyone. It is 10 o'clock and we're going to call this meeting, February 16th Committee of the Whole meeting, to order. As we begin, I'm going to ask you to rise as I recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, I'd like to read a statement which we read before any meeting due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It has been determined that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the related peacetime emergency declaration made by Governor Walz in accordance with Minnesota Statutes, Chapter 12. We have ensured that all members of the body participating in this meeting, wherever their physical location, can hear one another and can hear all discussion and testimony offered at today's meeting. We have also ensured that members of the public present at the regular meeting location of the body can hear all discussion and testimony and all votes of the members of the body. We've urged the public not to attend this meeting in person because of the COVID-19 pandemic and have ensured that members of the public can view and monitor the meeting remotely in real time by broadcasting this meeting on the Cook County website. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we've determined that it may be unfeasible for County Auditor Brady Powers, County Attorney Molly Hicken, County Administrator James Yorkey, and members of the Board of Commissioners to be physically present at the county boardroom at any of the Cook County courthouse. All votes will be conducted by roll call, so each member's vote on each issue will be identified and recorded. All right, with that, if we look at our agenda, we have minutes of the Committee of the Whole from January 19th. Are there any questions or comments that anyone has? Commissioner Hawkins.
Well, I think the last one that I saw, the names of those attending still included former commissioners. So I just wanted to point that out, that needs to get updated.
Correct. And I also noticed that in some of the presentations that there was some spacing issues. It looks like it had been cut and paste. And so we'll make sure that those items are taken care of, but it looks like the content is all there and is accurate. Any other remarks or comments?
Madam Chair, I did speak with April and Adriana about those errors, and I think they're working on getting a new draft out.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, the second item on our agenda is the Passion Pit property discussion, and there has been a PDF that was provided by Tim Nelson, who is leading that group. And Tim, any remarks or comments you'd like to make?
Well, understanding, of course, that thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, commissioners. And understanding that there are only 3 commissioners, we did want to wait until the 23rd for any official action to make sure that we had all 5 commissioners. So this is just obviously for discussion purposes. I don't know if you want me to run through kind of the background and bringing us up to where we are, or just have and answer any questions that you might have with regards to how we've gotten to where we are right now.
I would ask Commissioner Swallison if you would like to have that update or review since you're new to this group.
Thank you. I had looked over the materials this weekend and have been keeping up with it through the news, that type of thing. I found the summary and the information provided is adequate for me.
All right, thank you so much. Mr. Nelson, I do have a couple of remarks I'd like to share, and this might be something we would obviously discuss further next week when we have all our commissioners present. But I'm concerned with our joint powers group looking at a land acknowledgement statement and looking at the issues present at Passion Pit, if we should not consider expanding the number of people on that task force to make sure that we have representation from our Ojibwe or Anishinaabe community. That is something I think is very, very important. And also in reviewing the information, I wondered, given this is the home of George Morrison, if we might not want to include someone from the arts community, whether it be somebody from the Johnson Heritage Post or perhaps North House because of their instruction and the classes they offer with Ojibwe art, beading, things of that nature. But I think we should just have a discussion about making sure everybody is represented and everybody is at the table when we're looking at such an important issue.
Yeah, Madam Chair, and I agree in the fact that, what the task force did is just kind of throw out a recommendation, and there certainly is room for the commissioners to be able to expand upon the committee membership, the numbers, and anything like that. So you definitely have that ability to strike the committee however you would see fit to do that. I would also add too that next week we'll be talking about how we didn't talk as much about it at the task force, or not the task force, but the Parks and Trails Commission meeting. But it is kind of a longer term and a shorter term set of issues. And we had talked about the longer term, which is being able to establish this committee and go for several months of discussion. And then part of that is what do we do or how is the site maintained in between now and through that committee process. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that at next week's meeting as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Swallison.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Tim, is there a specific, I read that we're trying to make a decision through this committee or recommendation through the committee to the commissioner. Do we have a sense of the timeline that the state is looking for our answer as a county before they move forward?
Is anyone else having trouble hearing Mr. Svellison?
Oh,
I am also, yes.
okay. I'm not certain what to do about that.
It's better when you lean in.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll certainly lean up then. Thank you. My question was, Tim, do we have a sense of the timeline that the state is looking for our county response?
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'm going to have to get used to being able to pronounce that that name.
No problem. Make that via W and it's Swallison.
Swallison. Okay. Actually, yeah, that is a good question. I have been in fairly constant communication with Dwayne Hill, who's the district engineer for MnDOT, who's kind of the lead on our point of contact for that, the disposition of that property. And, his indication to me was that they are actually looking to us to kind of send them what we are looking for. And I had discussed with them the Parks and Trails recommendation of a 9-month period or no longer than 9-month period for this committee process. And he did indicate to me that that was okay within their time frame that they're looking at. The property is on the list for disposition. It's one that it's an old reclaimed gravel pit. They've already utilized it. Yep. It's on the list to be able to either sell to a private party or to a public entity. And so that it will be the ultimate disposition of it. If the county passes on it, it will be bid much like the property just to the west of there. MnDOT parcel had been auctioned off and purchased within the last several months here. and the same thing would happen. But yes, the time frame, they said 9 months is fine, and we would be in discussions with them in terms of also the short-term management of the area between when we would start a committee process and that 9 months.
Very good. Thank you.
Any further comments or remarks regarding Passion Pit? All right, if not, we'll move on to our presentations. And first, Tim is back with us again for our land services presentation, starting with vacation rentals.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, there we go. All right, can you all see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Good. So this is really a snapshot. It's not going to be very in-depth or involved, just because it is a 1-year overview. Basically, I'll start with a bit of a background as to how we got there. I know the 3 commissioners weren't directly involved in the process leading up to the licensing program. So I'll rewind just a little bit and kind of explain how we got to where we are, and then talk about the first year here. So just some of the background. This has been actually a long-standing discussion. We've had the discussion for many, many years. We didn't actually formalize our first formal committee until 2015. And in fact, the first 2 outcomes of committee discussions that we've had came back to the Board of Commissioners to really not do anything, to not necessarily start a licensing program. So we kind of just, it was a wait and see approach. And it wasn't until the 2018 into 19 is where we saw enough concerns that were generated as to want to go ahead and begin a program. So through that, the vacation rental ordinance was adopted on May 22nd of 2019. That was through, again, a committee process. We had brought in the vacation rental management companies, some at-large residents that live near vacation rentals, and it was a pretty comprehensive approach that we took. And we adopted that on May 19th, but we wanted to start the program at the beginning of the year instead of midway through the year for logistical purposes. We retained host compliance. We went through a RFP process looking at companies that would, or web-based outfits that would assist us in looking through all of the VRBO websites, all of the advertisement sites out there, so that we would be able to kind of get a good tally on how many vacation rentals are in, who's advertising for rentals, so that we can make sure that we get kind of everybody included in on the program. So we decided on host compliance. It's an international company, and we went through a few discussions with other companies, but host compliance turned out to be the one that received the bid or the award from us. And they started help building our website for the license program in November of 2019. The ordinance actually took effect on January 1st of 2020. And then the online permitting website went online or went live on February 28th. And from that point on, as we started accepting and processing all of the licenses. Why did we decide to go ahead and regulate the licensing or regulate vacation rentals? We did not want to be redundant in with the state. The state, Minnesota Department of Health, also licenses vacation rentals. So we didn't want to do that. They license vacation rentals and they regulate them for public health and public safety aspects. Do they have the appropriate safety, fire protection, egress, ingress, those kinds of things? We were looking at the possible conflicting uses within residential areas. So you have, in our county in particular, you have a lot of even small resorts that are mixed in with residential areas, and sometimes there can be conflicting uses. in those particular areas. And so we wanted to see if that was an aspect that we could probably and hopefully kind of smooth out any of those conflicting uses in those particular areas. And the other thing was creating and maintaining a level playing field with other resorts with regards to lodging taxes, et cetera. Some places that were doing vacation rentals weren't paying lodging taxes, and so they were able to charge less and be able to have a little bit of unfair competition with especially the mom and pop vacation or the resorts, just because they were able to lessen their costs and overheads and such. And so those are the two primary reasons why we decided to go ahead and even establish the licensing program. And the ordinance was drafted and adopted so that it would actually only be for a 3-year period. So we took a kind of a trial approach. We put the program into effect and we said, we're going to run this for 3 years. We're going to come back during the summer into the fall of 2022 and evaluate everything that's gone on and be able to make a determination at that point as to whether to make it run in perpetuity or just let it sunset if there aren't any issues or problems that we actually do need to regulate on that. So a lot of time was spent in terms of the definition of vacation rentals. There's a distinction, a big distinction between the state of Minnesota, what they define as vacation rentals and what they will license and what they won't, and what Cook County does. The state of Minnesota just says if you're renting for less than 7 days, they have a lodging license. It's not a vacation. They don't have a separate category of vacation rental licenses. Theirs is lodging license or not lodging license. So if you're renting for less than 7 days, you have to get a lodging license from the Minnesota Department of Health. We went through a lot of kind of discussions. Cook County is unique in terms of a lot of the attributes of vacation rentals. We have a lot of resorts that are actually made up of privately owned units within the resorts, but yet they're managed through the front desk and they're in resort commercial districts. And so those really weren't the areas because they were licensed, they're definitely paying their lodging taxes, and the expectation of the use of the property on a resort campus is expected to be a higher type of use. So there really wasn't that kind of conflicting uses. So we didn't really want to get all of what would be considered vacation or short-term rentals. We wanted to kind of narrow it down a little bit. So here is, and it's just kind of a big blob of words there, but there are 3 primary things that we want to take a look at and how we kind of narrowed down the vacation rentals in Cook County. And the 3 things basically are looking for, okay, so as I said, the Minnesota Department of Health is less than 7 days. We took a less than 30-day time period. That's one of the basic criteria. It's not a bed and breakfast, so it's not serving food or breakfast in the morning. We have a different category for that, and actually a bed and breakfast in the county is a conditional use permit, and vacation rentals by land use are designated as just permitted uses. Up until this point, they've been able to be used, people were able to use their houses as vacation rentals or cabins without even obtaining any kind of permit whatsoever. It was just permitted up until January of 2020. So it's not a bed and breakfast, but it also excludes all the similarly described premises which are managed and regulated as a part of a hotel or resort. And that was what I was kind of talking about before. So how many vacation rentals are there? How many do we start off with? And it really does depend on that definition. And that's how we ended up with the definition that we did. We worked a lot with the auditor's office and with Bob Thompson as the assessor to generate the numbers. There's the tax classification and all of this we wanted to go by, but it isn't necessarily the tax classification, even though that is a big part of the discussion with the state legislature and the auditors or the assessor's office and such. We wanted to just go with the definition that we had for licensing for the reasons why we wanted to license to begin with. So looking at all of them, the initial estimate totaled 634. And that is taking all of our short-term rentals into consideration. That includes all of those, includes those in the city of Grand Marais. It includes the resorts that are privately held units but managed by the resort companies and such. So that's a big number, and we didn't want to get into logistically managing all those if we did not have to. So we, by using our definition, we winnowed that down to an estimate of 270 when we went out for the request for proposals to get host compliance to go ahead and manage that web interfaced service for us. We estimated 270 for that. When we did retain host compliance, their first report back to us tallied advertisements at 377. And then we had to go work with them in terms of refining their search, because they have those little spider bots that go up on the internet, and they look and they have their algorithms and such like that to pull in all of the advertisements, looking at all the different VRBO sites and everything like that. And they were pulling in some of the part of the city of Grand Marais, and they were pulling in some of those resorts. And so we had our staff work with their staff to narrow that down and really refine out who are the actual vacation rentals and who are not. And so by the end of the year of 2020, the report tallied 266. So our estimates in working with the auditors, the assessors, and then working with host compliance to narrow it down was really close to the estimate that we had done earlier on when we put out that request for proposals. So by the end of 2020, the report tallied 266. Now, it's a moving target because some start and some drop off. And at any time during the year, some people will start advertising and start renting it out, and some people won't. Some people only rent out for certain portions of period of time, and then they don't advertise anymore and such like that. So that 266 is an approximate, it's an average, but it keeps going up and down depending on what's going on. So the actual numbers that we did by the end of 2017 or 2020, we did get in 217 license applications submitted, 203 licenses were issued, 14 were rejected because they were within the city limits. We did have a listing of 47 non-compliant outfits that had been identified as to their locations and such, and letters have been sent out, and then 16 yet as not identified. And how I say that is when they advertise on those sites, VRBO and other kinds of vacation rental sites, they don't necessarily say where their specific address is, and they'll just kind of give descriptors, and any pictures that they have on there may or may not represent the actual place. And so we have to work with the host compliance staff and with the assessor staff, and Bob Thompson's been pretty helpful with this in trying to be able to identify the properties that are actually coming up on the advertisements. And so there's 16 of those that are yet not identified. Now we hadn't really, because it was the first year, and it was COVID, pandemic, everything was kind of in a flux, and we were working in the courthouse and then at home and all these different things. We weren't entirely aggressive in this first year in pursuing all of these, but by the end of the year, we did get all of the letters sent out to those 47 non-compliant identified places, and we have gathered in some of those. So we're on a track of bringing those operations into compliance, and we're at a pretty good place with that. Looking at it financially, the license fee was established at $200 for a license, and that's an annual fee. And that we did and decided by ordinance to prorate that for the first year of their operation into $50 segments per quarter. So if you're starting and you get your license early on in January or so, it's for the full year, so it would be $200. And if it's in the fall, you don't start you're renting out or so until October or so, then it would be $100, $50, whatever, it would be prorated out. Now, we have found logistically that that's difficult for us to manage, and we're going to go ahead and just propose, and it'll be running through you guys at some later point in terms of just making the license fee $200 annually, and not having it prorated because it is difficult to keep up. Plus, it's an encouragement for people to go ahead and advertise and try not to get caught and then say that, push off their licensing as far as they can, because then the cost would be reduced. So 2020 revenue is approximately $40,000. Off of that, the host compliance monitoring costs were $23,405. So that's a pretty good deal in being able to cover the costs of the services that are provided to us. They're very efficient and effective in the costs that they do, or in the services that they do provide for us. And that balance beyond that covers administrative costs. We have one staff member, Joseph Ruth, who is the primary lead on circling around with all of the vacation rental licensing and getting people up to speed and such like that. So the finances have actually worked out pretty well, considering all of the other programs in the department that we got. So the issues that we did experience over 2020, in the fact that host compliance is a multinational place, it's a big company. And so being able to work with them to getting that large type vendor to customize their services and work to work well with our very small level of county and numbers, it's kind of difficult. They are very good to work with. It's just being able to, steer a big ship with a small rudder kind of thing takes a little while to turn. So we've had a lot of exchange back and forth with them, but we are really pleased in terms of the services that we have gotten out of them and their willingness to work with us to be able to customize to fit into our specific type of program. It's interesting because we had heard from folks, there's a lot of people complaining, oh, there's loud parties, it's trespassing, it's all of these things that we'd heard. And so as a part of the package of services that we get from host compliance, one of those was a 24/7 hotline to be able to have for people to be able to call if they have issues or complaints or whatever the case may be. And we found that over the course of the year, the vast majority of the calls that have come into that hotline are basically inquiries from people as to how they go ahead and get their license so that they can rent out. So it's fine. That way, we certainly appreciate people calling in, and we're happy to give that information out. We had thought that it would have been used more for complaints or so. I did have a conversation with our sheriff about his knowledge of any increased levels or anything of problems with regards to noise or trespass or complaints. And he said it's really hard for them to track that because they go to a specific address and they don't have the cross-reference sheet in terms of whether it's a vacation rental or not a vacation rental. In some places, maybe a vacation rental one year and not a vacation rental the next year. So it's really hard for them to track that. But we certainly haven't heard anything from within the department in terms of the number of complaints for any one particular vacation rental outfit. In the beginning part, most all of the management companies basically did all of the licensing for their clients, and that made it good and easy. And we had one point of contact, and we were able to help people or help that person through licensing all of their clients that they manage for vacation rentals. But because of the COVID and everything else, staffing levels at some of the management companies has dropped off to the point where they are asking their own individual owners to go ahead and renew their licenses. So instead of helping one person through the process of a lot of different licenses, we're having to help many people through their own licenses that they didn't do last year, but they're having to do this year. So that's just a little bit more hands-on that we're doing, which is, again, fine. It kind of sets it up for them to be able to renew the next year. We're trying to have it as a seamless and easy a process as possible. So that's been working out, but that's just been kind of an issue that involves a little bit more of our time. Keeping up with those numbers between us and host compliance, that those monthly, we get monthly reports in terms of numbers of operations that are out there. And that, like I said, it goes up and down depending on who's advertising and who's not advertising. We kind of knew this going in, As a part of our Planners Association, statewide Planners Association, we had presentations from the city of Minneapolis and other places that have had licensing programs in place for their vacation rentals. And they've described it as just a big game of whack-a-mole that you know, they have to hit different vacation rentals to pop up and then drop off and pop up and drop off in all different places. So it's logistically a little tough to contend with. But it's getting easier for us after this first year to be able to kind of track as to who will be advertising and who's not. And then another issue is the lodging tax versus the sales tax. Interesting aspect of that is the VRBO sites. Some of them will go ahead and collect the state sales tax and submit that directly to the state for the property owners, but not the lodging tax. And so some property owners have thought that VRBO sites were collecting and submitting their lodging tax on behalf of them when they're finding out that that wasn't the case. And so hopefully that'll lead to an increase in the lodging tax revenues that we get in from people who hadn't up until this point been paying the lodging taxes, and then now find that they do need to. So that's been a benefit in that respect. And that's my presentation for the vacation rentals for 2020. Like I said, it's just kind of a snapshot and overview of this last year. And I guess I will turn it to you, Madam Chair, for any questions that you'd have.
So are there any questions or comments from the group?
Madam Chair, this is Brady.
Yes, Brady. Yes, Brady.
I would just ask Tim, so does host compliance, do they help with that confusion that lodging taxpayers have regarding who's collecting the lodging tax? You know, when VRBO and Airbnb, I know that I've gotten reports that they lead people to believe that they're collecting the lodging tax when they're not. They'll list that they're paying, that they're collecting all local taxes, including this, they don't call it lodging tax, but that type of tax. Does host compliance, is that something that they directly talk to clients about?
Good question, Brady and Madam Chair and Commissioners. The host compliance really doesn't, they're an information receiving company. So they go out and their algorithms, they track who's advertising, who's not advertising, provides those reports to us. They do interact with the vacation rental owners by virtue of going on our behalf. And so they send letters to all of them, but they send the letters that we submit to them to send. And yes, we've included that information. So all of the vacation rental owners and operators have received letters from host compliance from us through host compliance that has described that issue, that lodging taxes, you know, to be aware that their VRBO site most likely are not paying their lodging taxes for them. So yes, they've gotten that information.
Okay.
But host compliance doesn't follow up with them. They ask us if they want us to follow up, and then we would provide information.
Gotcha.
So yeah, kind of a circle.
So I think we're just getting probably those that they get the letter and still want confirmation, and so they're emailing and calling. Is this really true? You know, so.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Hawkins.
I have a couple. So going back to the lodging tax, and I just want to make sure I understand the process. So your department makes sure that the lodging tax is being paid before they are issued a license? Is that?
it is in our ordinance that the lodging tax is paid up. We basically use the previous year's information on that. And so we've coordinated with Brady and Kelly with regards to getting the information from them. There's no way for us to really confirm that. There's only the way for us, our department, to confirm through the auditor's office whether they've paid the taxes or not.
So all the licenses that the 207 or 203 issued, you verified with the auditor's office that they are on the lodging tax list for payment.
Yes, that is my understanding. Joseph is the spearhead through that, and it is something that we probably should spend some more time. Especially if in 2022 we want to perpetuate the program as it goes. We do probably need a more streamlined process between us and the auditor's office to make sure that we can get that in like real time and such like that to be able to catch that. But yes, that coordination has been done.
And so do we know how many of these rentals that were found that had not been paying lodging tax previously, but should have been? Do we know that number?
I don't know that number. Brady might be able to know that number. I don't know it offhand.
I don't know it offhand either.
That kind of relates to the impetus for all this was we were worried about people not paying their lodging tax. We were worried that there were issues with neighbors. And so it doesn't quite sound like we really had an issue from what I'm hearing today. So I'm just think it'd be very important to kind of track that information for when we decide, should we continue this or not? And I'm wondering if we can also provide that list to our law enforcement so they can be tracking, are they receiving calls specifically related to these units? Just will give us a better information so that when we decide, should we or should we not, those are the kind of things I would like to know.
Yeah, Commissioner Hawkins, that is a good point and good thought, and Madam Chair and Commissioners. What we were really focused on in this first year was making sure that we did get everybody on board, and so that was our main focus, especially getting waylaid with this COVID. So we really dug in terms of getting everybody identified, and still we had the 47 operations at least that we did finally get identified through the course of the year, and still have 16 that are not, that we're working on. So that was the kind of the main focus, is to make sure that we did get that streamlined, we did get everybody online. And yes, the part of the whole point of that is to be able to track those kinds of different things. And we can certainly work with the law enforcement. That is a list that probably would have to be updated once a month or once a quarter at least, to take addresses off and put addresses on, just because those do change over the course of the year. But yeah, most certainly.
Thank you so much. Mr. Yorkie.
Yes, I just want to say, Commissioner Hawkins, I think your questions are really good ones, and I will work with Tim and Brady and also the Sheriff's Office to make sure we get answers to those questions. Because yes, the payment of taxes and also making sure that these rentals are not creating nuisances in the community is very important, and we need to be tracking that. So we'll be following up on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator Yorkie. Any other questions or remarks? All right, with that then, we will move on to land use permit activity.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. There we go. And this one's a little bit more of a broader sense. This is kind of just looking at trend lines. Again, this is not diving deep into the weeds because I know, time is critical, but this is just kind of bringing this out to be able to kind of start a discussion. If there's any desire on the commissioner's behalf to want to dig into some more of these trend lines and stuff like that, I'm certainly happy to be able to do so. But here we go. This is basically looking from 2006, and I started in 2006 because that's kind of when we had that peak of building, and then we had that housing crash basically. And so it's interesting to see the numbers from before and then after that as we go. So basically, we're going to look at a few different levels here. We're looking at land use permits, which is all made up of new construction, residential additions, accessory structures. We'll look at recreational vehicle permits as well on that. We'll look at variances, the number of variances that are processed throughout the years. And then we'll look at subdivisions with regards to plats / planned unit developments, and then administrative type subdivisions. So the land use permits, as far as our county goes, that's our definition, and it kind of encompasses everything. It says, no land or structure shall be changed in use, no structure, including decks, be erected, placed, removed, and replaced, altered in its exterior dimensions or moved unless a land use permit's issued. So that's kind of an all-encompassing thing. There are a couple of exemptions, though. By our ordinance, we do exempt accessory structures less than 161 square feet. So that's kind of looking at a 10 by 16 shed and lower. And it's not inhabitable. So an accessory structure is not one that can be a spare cabin, even if it's a 10 by 14 or something like that. It's uninhabitable accessory structures less than 161 square feet, and then unsided wood sheds. And those two provisions were put in 1984, and it just remained unchanged since then. It is important to note that though those are exempted from land use permits, they do have to meet all the required setbacks. So somebody still can't put a shed, 10 by 16 shed closer to their property line or closer to the lake. They would still have to get a variance, even if they did not require a land use permit for that. So looking at it, this is an interesting chart because clearly we had a lot more land use permits from 2007 and before. And then it dropped off over those 3 years. 2009 ends up being kind of the low year for most all of our categories, as you'll see in the upcoming slides. And with land use permits, and again, this is a accumulation of all the land use permits, whether it's new construction or accessory structures or whatever, has had a slow and steady kind of climb. But as you'll see, here in 2007 was our highest year of land use permits, and 2009 was the lowest in terms of all of our history. So in those 3 years, we spanned the entire course. And then from 2009, we have still never been able to get up to the pre-2007 averages. And here's that line. That's that pre-2007 average that was prior to this. So that's kind of an interesting stat right there, is that the land use permits have kind of fallen off. They've fallen off in numbers, but not in complexity. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about in just a little bit. So by state requirement and just by the conditions of the land, the applications and the processing of the permits has been and become a little bit more complex over the last couple, especially 15 years. In terms of people building in more difficult conditions, with soils or bluff type activities or so, trying to make the best of what they have. And so we have found that even though there's less or fewer permits than previously before, they are usually more complex in being able to process that out. So here's the new construction. So new construction was up there. Again, it's the same type of curve. It dropped off and then has had a slow and kind of steady progressive increase over that time. So new construction hasn't responded quite as well as additions. So it kind of, you see that change. it had that drop and then just shot right up. So more people after that crash were basically adding on to existing structures than they were building new construction. You saw a little dip there in 2016, but then it was starting to climb again as well. So we've seen new or residential additions having a much better rebound from 2006 through 2009 up into the present, more so than the new construction. Accessory structures and garages, it's that same drop between 2006 and 2009, and then a kind of more steady as she goes kind of increase in there as up through the last 10, 11 years or so has shown that just more of a steady climb and not real peaking out again. Recreational vehicles, and I started that in 2015 because that's when we started our new program. Prior to 2015, we had a different type of permit structure where people had to get a standard permit to be able to put a recreational vehicle, and that's not to store a recreational vehicle. Anybody can store a recreational vehicle on their property. This is to actually use it maybe as a cabin or as a second place, a guest cabin or whatever, when people come over. If it's going to be used, before 2015, they would have to get a permit, standard admin permit for 2 years. And then if they were going to retain it after that point, they'd have to get a conditional use permit to be able to use that. We switched that in 2015 to just renewal type of admin permit. So the first permit's good for 2 years, and then each successive permit after that is good for 3 years. And so we had a drop, but then we've had kind of a steady increase. But this new program has only been going on since 2015. And so that's why those those numbers and that representation is a little bit more limited in that. And so variances. And please, anybody can stop me if they have any questions going through, if they see anything on the chart, or we can just refer back to them when we get at the end of this. So variances are basically if you want to do something with the land, you want to add on or you want a new construction, but it doesn't conform to the setback distances to the lake or to the property lines or to the bluff areas or to road right-of-way setbacks or so. Anybody can apply for a variance, which is just relief from any of the provisions in the ordinances and any of the ordinances. And basically by state statute, it says the strict enforcement would cause a practical difficulty. And that there's like 6 criteria for establishing what a practical difficulty is. And that's what our Board of Adjustment is for. They're the ones that make the final determination as to what, whether a practical difficulty would exist or not, whether it was self-generated or created by the property owner, or if it were just exists with the land. And also considering if the construction fits within the character of the locality. That also is by state statute. So taking a look at variances, same kind of line. You see that same drop off from 2006 to 2009, and then a nice kind of jump up, and it's kind of grown since then. So there's been a lot of variances, and what that kind of demonstrates, and I've had a discussion with Bill Lane, who is the zoning administrator, and he processes all of the variances. What this represents is this in conjunction with the increase that we saw in the residential additions as opposed to new construction. So you had a lot more residential additions. This is kind of representing that people are more so getting and adding on to their existing structures that may pre-exist the ordinance requirements. So pre-1984, we didn't have the setback distances to the lakes or anything. And so people that have built close, now they're being added on to, or if it's new construction or so, it is because the land is a lot more difficult to work with. A lot of the easier buildable land has been developed already, and so this is more difficult land to work with. And so they may be pushed closer to the lake by virtue of a cliff behind them or something like that. So that's why we're seeing more of this increase in the number of variances that are going through, is just by people wanting to improve their existing properties that they have that may be in more difficult situations. Plats, interesting. Prior to 2006, leading up to that, we had a steady run of plats and plan unit development subdivisions. But as you see that I didn't even bother putting in a trend line on this because it falls off the scale. And other than just a couple that were processed in 2015, 2016, we don't see plats or plan unit developments anymore. Those are the larger scale. Those are ones where actual developers, land developers will come in and they'll do a full-blown subdivision of 20 lots, 30 lots or so, and they'll have roads platted in and surveys, and it costs a lot of money, and it's kind of speculative in nature if they feel that they're going to be able to sell these in a reasonable time and be able to recover the cost for that huge kind of capital outlay in putting that together. That's when they do them, and obviously after that crash and then now following that line down to 2009 and 10, we just haven't seen them coming back, and that kind of marries up with the next slide in terms of the administrative subdivisions. It's kind of an interesting, we didn't, I would say prior to this 2006 timeframe, we actually didn't process administrative subdivisions as a permitted thing. There was a pre-existing exemption that allowed people to be able to subdivide one property into two at any time during the course of a year, during a 12-month period. They could just, and without coming to the to the county, without getting a process, they could split one property into two once per year. In addition to that, they could do one property into four as long as they were 5 acres or more, and you didn't have to create a new road. So those two types of subdivisions were exempted from processing, and a lot of those were done that didn't have any county involvement whatsoever. Well, in 2006, we adopted a subdivision ordinance, which created this administrative subdivision process, which is where you can create up to 4 lots, and beyond 5 and more, you have to do a plat. But you can do up to 4 lots, and it's just an administrative fee. And we just want to make sure that the wetlands are taken care of, that the lots are the right size, that septic sites are available for each of the lots, that each lot can basically stand of themselves without without intervention. Because we found that with those exemptions, we did find and have still had to work with lots that were created, and even though they met the dimensional characteristics of a lot, they really couldn't stand on their own as a lot because they couldn't support the septic systems, or they didn't, they were full of wetlands. I've seen an 8-acre lot that was created that was entirely wetlands. So going through just an administrative review helps kind of deliberate that process on an upfront, instead of having somebody who's had a lot that was created and then doesn't get to experience the difficulties or doesn't even know about them until it's been sold a couple times, and then that new owner comes into our office and finds that there's some serious issues in being able to develop that property. And that's why we created that administrative subdivision process. And so we see a lot more taking place, a lot more subdivisions taking place through the administrative subdivision, obviously, than the plats or the PUDs. It's a lot lesser costing and more expedient process. And it's not quite as speculative. People can do the 4 lots and sell them if they'd like to, and not have to stick a whole lot of money into capital outlay or infrastructure and such like that. So, okay. Yeah, this was a really quick snapshot on here. So just to summarize in conclusion, the land use permits did drop in numbers, but they did also increase in complexity. We find that people are placing more additions rather than new constructions. More variances are being processed to work with the difficult constraints than previously. And then we have seen an increase in number of long-term recreational vehicle use in lieu of cabins. People are kind of putting their RVs on and using those a little bit longer or more so than just building a cabin right away. And then the subdivisions are fewer and in smaller chunks rather than in full-blown plats. And that is that expedient presentation. And so I'll leave the slides in case anybody wants to reference back to the slides, but Madam Chair, I'll just turn it back to you for any questions or comments people might have.
Any questions or comments from the group? Administrator Yorkie.
Yes, I just wanted to note, we are currently doing some work with the EDA to explore the creation of a housing and redevelopment authority. And the numbers that we were seeing in terms of new construction, obviously housing is a major issue for Cook County, and we have a real shortage of not just available real estate, but really affordable housing for folks who work in the community. And so we are looking to create an HRA here in Cook County. Exactly how or when that's going to happen remains to be seen. But as we move forward in that work, I would hope that we would start to see the lack of new housing starts hopefully start to reverse. But obviously that's a long road to travel. There are lots of community discussions that have to happen before we can really move forward on that. But there's a lot of energy behind that issue. A lot of folks in the community are very interested. And I'm hopeful that in the coming months, we'll have a plan for creating an HRA and moving forward on getting some new incentives in place and attracting some new funding for housing projects in the community.
Commissioner Hawkins, you had your hand up as well.
Sullivan. Yeah, I have questions about some of the permits, and do we track whether or not those permits ultimately are for year-round residents or seasonal residents? Do we track that anyway?
Commissioner Hawkins, Madam Chair, Commissioners, we do work with the assessor's office quite a bit. They'll go out and they'll do their quintiles. They'll pull records from us. All the records that we have are open to them. So there's a dialogue, a kind of continual dialogue that we have. We don't specifically track because we have to deal with land use regardless of whether it is year-round or seasonal. That is a question that's more important and more relevant to the assessor's office. For us, it is the actual footprint of the structure on the property. So while we do have all of that information and we have that dialogue with the assessor's office, the assessor is the one who would be tracking whether that is a year-round, because frankly, from a land use standpoint, we just presume that everything's going to be year-round. And that's why we do the types of reviews that we do, so that they would be able to be sustained year-round. And then it's just the only reason that you would do it for limited use or other kinds of use would be for taxation purposes. And I would just add, since you did ask that question, we do have other kinds of permits that I just didn't include on this presentation, just because I wanted to focus on the land use specific types of permits. So.
Yeah, and I guess my questions are kind of related to, we all know we have a housing issue, and we are going to have to look at every aspect of that crisis. And I'm just wondering, do we have people trying to live here year-round building, or do we not? And that's why I wanted that information. I'm also wondering about the fees associated with these kinds of permits. Do you have information on the dollars collected per year by these fees?
Sorry, Commissioner Hawkins. That is a good question, and yes, we do, and I can certainly provide that. I had contemplated whether to throw that into this. I looked at the agenda and it's a pretty full agenda for you guys. And I thought, boy, if we got into a discussion on all the fees and the budget, because we have a structure for the land use permit fees, and they're based off of square footage of the structure. And the different types of permit fees have changed over the years. So you would see fluctuations in the amount of revenues that we had taken in, by virtue of the fees and by virtue of the fee structure. So yes, that is something that I can provide. It is something we track. We go through that primarily in the budgeting process. But I just kind of made the decision not to really include that in on this one because there's already so many issues to have to discuss. And to go back, your other question with regards to the housing, I would say that a lot of the interest, this is kind of speaking anecdotally, but a lot of the interest that we have had in new construction or even buying used places in the real estate is for the vacation rentals, more so to build homes as for full-time occupancy. That's just kind of anecdotally speaking. We don't track that other than through the vacation rental license thing, but we've had a lot of inquiries, and we do know folks that have bought a handful of properties and homes and such that have kind of pulled them out of the full-time housing market to put into vacation rental services. So that is a factor.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Yeah, I would just like to request that maybe you could send this to us so we can look at it again, think about some of the things that you've presented. Really like your report. I appreciate the work you put into that. And I would like to see the number side of it also. If you could send that to me, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Hawkins and Madam Chair, I was actually going to kind of say that at the beginning that I'll send this both of these PowerPoints to April to send out to everybody or have it made available for everybody, and I'll do another one specifically for the financial part, or maybe even just have that as a spreadsheet. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Other questions? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Nelson. We appreciate all your efforts. And at this time, Ms. Hansel has a presentation for us from Cook County Soil and Water.
Hi, well, thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Thanks. Sorry, my face is a little dark here. I can't quite figure that out, but I just wanted to give you all an update on who we are as a district and what we're all about, and just show you what some of the work is that we do and explain how we're connected with the county and how our work works with the county. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm Elena Hansel. I should introduce myself. I'm the district manager and I'm the Cook County Water Plan Coordinator. So I play two roles. When I started the position, I was the county water planner, and then I moved up into district manager 4 years ago. So I'll share my screen here. There we go. All right. So Cook County Soil and Water Conservation District, we have a mission. We went through a strategic planning process a few years ago, and we're around to, our mission is to maintain soil and water quality in Cook County by fostering responsible land use and by controlling soil and erosion and non-point pollution. The board will encourage local conservation efforts by providing educational, technical, and financial assistance for local land users. And I'm going to explain who our board is and what they're about in a minute here. And our vision is to conserve and protect the soil and water resources of Cook County. So who are we? This is the best picture I could come up with. Here is our Zoom picture. And it doesn't have everyone on our board on it because not everyone was able to be at the meeting or be visual at the meeting. But we have 5 elected supervisors. The district boundaries are a little bit different than the county commissioner boundaries, but pretty similar. So Joan Farnham, she's down in the corner here, and she is our board chair. We have Stan Tall, who's up here, and John Tweest, and then David Bergwin and David Groshish. So those are the 5 elected supervisors, and they are my supervisors that I report to and that our staff report to. We are a conservation district, and I'll explain this again in a minute, under Minnesota State Statute Chapter 103C. So we're a subdivision of the state legally, and that's who we are, that's who governs us. We have 5 year-round staff. When the district first came to Cook County, or was established in Cook County, there was only 1 person. Now there's 5. And so we have myself, so I'm the district manager and the water plan coordinator. Teresa Oberg, who is to my right on the screen, she is the district administrator. The reason we have that title, because sometimes that gets confusing, is when we reorganize with people leaving and jobs shifting, she's our person. She's part-time, but she does a lot of our budgeting and our finances and those invoices. And so that just seemed like a good role for her. She took some of that responsibility off of the district manager because I still kept my old full-time job and took another job. So I wasn't able to take all those responsibilities. So she took on that role. We have Michaela Klingeman, who's below me. She is a conservation technician. She's been with the district for 4 years. Amanda Weberg, she was the Cook County AIS coordinator. Now she's with the district. That program moved into our office last March. And so now she's with our office. And then we have Phil Larson, and he is a technician also, and he's been with the district a little over 4 years. So that is our staff. Other people on the picture are state agencies or federal agencies that we work with that attend our meetings. So a little background about conservation districts. The first district was organized in 1938, and there's 88 districts throughout the state. I always like to say that we're more of if there's an emergency, they call us. It's like, it seems like whenever there's a problem, we always get called instead of sometimes being able to be on the front end and being proactive. But hopefully that's starting to change with a lot more resource planning. So I'm not going to read through all of that, but you can kind of see what we're stand for and what we work towards. And being on different parts of the state, you know, they might be more focused on farming and different water quality issues than we are up here in Cook County. Whoops. So we are funded a little bit different than most organizations. We have some county funding, we have the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and then our remaining operating budget comes from grants. So the remaining operating budget, that restricted funds, means that those funds can only be used for specific projects. We can't be spending them on whatever, it's just, that's it. So what does that actually look like? It varies from year to year. So this is our annual revenue sources just for 2021. And you can say, holy cow, we have a lot of money. But when you really break it down, that's a lot of it's restricted towards specific projects. So we write grants in order to do our projects and to do our work. So we charge for services and conservation, that top one, and that's that little tiny bit, that's our tree sale. That's it. That's like $100 a year is what we get for that. The next you'll see our state funds. So we get funding from the Board of Water and Soil Resources, the Clean Water Land and Legacy Funds, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Conservation, and this is just for this year. It varies, as you can see, from year to year. Conservation Partner Legacy, Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage, Aquatic Invasive Species Prevention Aid, and the Minnesota Department of Health. And these are 2 different projects. And they're often combined with a federal because most of our grants require a match, and you cannot match state to state. So when we get a state grant, we've got to find a federal grant and vice versa. So then we have federal funding to do other work. So the Lake Superior Coastal Program, the Great Lakes Commission, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, National Fish and Wildlife, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And then we have our county funding. So from the green up, we have restricted funds. So those funds will be used for different projects, what I'll highlight in a minute. And then in order to say, you know, people are like, wow, so what does that mean? This is how we keep track of our hours. Sometimes there's questions, you know, what are they doing over there in that little office? And so with every grant, we have to track every single hour. So this is what our work record looks like every day and every week as an example. So just to help explain and to make it very transparent. This is how we track our funding. This is how we track our hours. We get audited with certain state grants, reconciled. So once we spend 40 to 50%, they come in and check all of our records to make sure that everything's good before we are released any more funding. So we have a lot of checks and balances within our systems and within our funding. So what do our standard operations look like? Need to move my picture here. We have site visits by request from private landowners. We often get phone calls. On average, it can be from 20 to 30 to 40 phone calls within a year. So that we'll go out and look at forestry projects. We'll look at shoreland. We'll look at stormwater issues, talk about plants. It just kind of varies from person to person. We implement the buffer law for the state. We help with tracking and reporting, and that's in collaboration with Land Services. We participate in the Wetland Conservation Act and the technical panel, evaluation panel for that. As a water planner, which I'll go into more in depth, I have to track and develop and assist with the county in the soil and water plans. And there's 2 of those, the Lake Superior North 1 Watershed 1 plan and the Cook County Comprehensive Water Plan. We help with reviewing variance and zoning requests, and we implement conservation practices with landowners. So the photos here is an example of a project that we implemented. We had a landowner come out, call us, and we came out and said, I've got these issues here. This creek is getting blown up. Highway 61 is right here. I'm pretty concerned that it's just going to keep eroding all the way to the road and cause a lot of issues. It's just a mess. So we were able to find funding and assist the landowner, and this is what it looked like after the project. It's an opposite view, but the slope was graded to just be more stable. This is all vegetated now and planted, if you were to look at it. So just an example of a project we've done with a landowner. Helps reduce sediment, and it's good for the water quality. Other operations, standard operations, working with volunteers and surface water monitoring, providing education and outreach opportunities. We have to do grant administration, of course, on all of that funding, so that takes quite a bit of time. We coordinate the state climatology, snow and rain reporting. So we've got a lot of monitors throughout the county that do a lot of climate stuff with tracking their weather every single day. And then we coordinate the annual tree sale. And then again, to keep our office doors open, we seek grant funding. So a big part of my work is the water management planning. The county used to have this position with them, and I'm not sure when it moved over to the district, but it's been with the district for at least over 10 years, because I've been with the county since then, for almost 10 years here. And so what is it? We have 2 different plans in the county. There's the Cook County Comprehensive Water Management Plan. This was adopted in October of 2014. It's been around before then, but that was our last revision. It's a 10-year plan for both the local government units. So that means Cook Soil and Water and Cook County for resource management to achieve good water quality. It covers the Rainy River headwaters, and I'll show a map of that next. It used to be the entire county, but because the state has switched to this watershed management, it now just covers the northern part of the county. The adoption of the plan by the county and the district then helps with some funding that gets released through the Board of Water and Soil Resources. So it helps the county by providing septic system funding for $18,600. It helps the Wetland Conservation Act that's split between the county and the district to implement work with the wetlands. The water plan, that's my position, gets $14,000, and then the shoreland, that helps with, again, the county. It's not much, but it helps with some of the shoreline work that they do. So as I mentioned before, they moved from that county plan to this watershed plan. So Cook County applied in 2014 to be a pilot for the One Watershed One plan and was awarded that. And Cook County, Cook SWCD, Lake County, and Lake SWCD, I should say, we all went in together for the pilot. And that was accomplished in 2017. It is also a 10-year plan for local government units. So those are the 4 that have adopted it. The policy committee, which a commissioner from each county and a supervisor from each district sits on that policy committee. They're the ones who help direct how the funds are being spent and help direct some of that work that's accomplished through the plan. So here you can see this is a map of the entire area that's covered under this management plan. And here's the Rainy River headwaters. So there's the part that the county plan is covering. It reaches just a little bit down into the St. Louis County, but because it's under 10% of this entire landmass, they did not participate in the plan. So the plan only covers these 2 counties and these 2 districts. So what does the watershed plan mean? It means a lot. I'm not going to go into that because I want to be respectful of your time, but I know people like to see the dollars. And so it means that we implement the plan that guides the district works. And with that, there is some funding that comes with it. And so in FY18, we were, all 4 entities were awarded the $300,000, a little over. And then the policy committee had to help direct where was that money going to be spent. And so we had a lot of discussions and a lot of work with it and brought these projects forward. And so to date, the funding lasts for 3 years. To date, there's been the Lake Superior erosion map, and that is a map that's in progress. It's about a 4 to 5 year project. So that was phase 1 that was completed. That project will help direct work to help landowners who are building and on Lake Superior understand that erosion rate. So they will hopefully not continue to build so close to help the decision makers and understand how quickly the erosion is going to be with the varying lake effects and the lake levels. And then we worked with the city, this district did, to implement some stormwater basin on 2nd Street. We're going to be completing other projects with that funding this year. So the 8th Avenue stormwater ponds, if you've driven by the rec park, it's not that great and they're not functioning very well. So we're doing that project with the city with this funding. And then we're assessing the village ditch, and we're going to be looking at sediment loading and what needs to happen to help reduce some of the issues with that. So that was FY18. And then in FY20, there was a larger pot of money that became awarded. So as this transition goes throughout the state, the funding becomes less for competitive grants, and then more funding is put in towards these base fundings for these plans that have been adopted and implemented. So the funding was much larger, and it was split into 2. We were, again, kind of the pilot for this. It was split into 2 different grant agreements. So the conservation districts are awarded less than the counties, which is fine. We knew that that was going to happen. It's just based off of project and project needs and what's best for the resources and what fits with the watershed plan. So for the district, we are the fiscal agent for both of the district grants, so for FY18 and FY20 under the SWCD. And it means we're going to be working at education outreach and working on that next phase for the erosion map. Rest of the projects with this funding are taking place in Lake SWCD. So it's stormwater work, the City of Two Harbors Stormwater Management Plan, our joint effort for education outreach, some forestry work, and then again, that joint effort for Lake Superior erosion map. For FY20, then that also means that the county was awarded funding because they brought projects forward. So for Cook County, it's working on, and I will let Tim speak to that if he wants to, but it's to work on SSTS abatement work and to work on helping get systems back into compliance. It's a huge issue for our water quality up here. And then for Lake SWCD, sorry, it should have been Lake County, but for Lake County, it's for the similar work, so working with SSTS work and upgrades. And then there's always money for administration because these projects need a lot of work and the grant funding needs a lot of administration. So what does our workload look like in 2021? Again, we have 5 staff and we have a variety of projects that we do. So for the City of Grand Marais, we have stormwater projects. We have 2 stormwater projects that we're going to be installing. One will be that we're going to be closing. This is 4th Avenue here. And that's looking up. So all that water is going down. This road will be getting closed and turning into area to catch rainwater and to treat it. And a walking path will be installed there. So the landowners have been asking for this at least since I've been around. So it's kind of exciting to get everybody on board, the city and the landowners on board. So we'll be installing and closing this, installing projects here and then closing off this road. This is the 8th Avenue ponds by the rec park. So this will be looking different and changed. We're still in the process of designs being completed right now, but it will have a different look to it. And then below we'll be finishing this village ditch. This is one area of the village ditch and finishing that assessment up and developing our projects for the future for that. We're going to also be working with the city on developing a plan for future projects and to get things lined up for additional work and funding. We will be working at Friedenberg Creek. This is on the very, very west end of the county. This is part of the Two Island watershed. It is one of the coldest refuge for trout actually in Minnesota. So it's a pretty important stream. As you can see, the culverts here don't allow for fish to get up into these areas where they could be spawning, or where they could have, little guys could have a place to survive under some brush. They just can't make that jump. And here it's completely blocked and culverts are crushed. So working with the highway department and with other agencies, with landowners, Cliffs Mining and the power company, will be replacing 3 projects. And that's where a lot of our budget, those restricted funds go to. These are very expensive. We have to replace part of a railroad. So these are very, very expensive and large projects. They've been in the works for about 3 years now. So we're excited to get them in the ground. We'll be finishing up that culvert inventory. Michaela has been working on that and working with the highway department, finishing up the prioritization tools and working with the Forest Service on that. And then we are starting work, 3 years of work in the Flute Reed watershed, hopefully with more. There's what's called a total maximum daily load, a TMDL. So that's for sediment. And so we're going to be continuing work in there. This is one example of a project. It's called a Hewitt ramp, which you can no longer see here. There's actually a log there, and the beaver have now dammed it all up. And this landowner approached us 2 years ago to do some riparian planting and to remove the beaver dam and to restabilize the bank. So that will be one of our projects this year that we'll be working on. We're going to continue water monitoring. We'll do our, this is currently all funding dependent. We're waiting to hear back from the Department of Health, but we hope to be continuing to monitor for E. coli for 12 Lake Superior beaches, and then continuing to monitor for inland lakes. We're going to be doing this. It will look different than it has in the past due to funding limitations, but we're going to continue working with volunteers and lake associations for that. We're still determining how many numbers of lakes we'll do and how many volunteers we'll be working with, but we're excited to continue this program. And I don't know that we'll continue our, in the past, we've done Lake Superior monitoring. We discontinued it last year due to COVID. We might continue it this year, but again, it's dependent on funding. We don't have the funding for it. So it's a matter of long-term determining what we can do with it. We also really work on education outreach. We do newspaper inserts, so we'll continue that. We have 2 neighborhood meetings, which we're planning. So Flute Reed watershed and then the Devil's Track watershed. We have a Rainy River Headwaters meeting, and that's to do some work with the MPCA. We like to do our Earth Day outreach and then other opportunities as they come up. So Lake Superior outreach and what we can. We just finished up work with the Geological Atlas in January. And so that was a program with the county to help get a countywide geological atlas, which will really help to understand water and water quality and what's going on with our geology and how it impacts the water. As I mentioned before, aquatic invasive species was moved into our office last March. And so we'll continue to work on implementing this program, hire boat inspectors, continue with education outreach, and continue to promote the wash stations. So we really appreciate the relationship we have with the county and our partnership. We work on a service agreement with the county. As you noticed, our funding is very, very limited. If we didn't have that service agreement, it would be very difficult to do our work, to help so many landowners. And I have a lot more numbers I can provide. I just didn't want to bombard you with a lot of numbers and data, but we are really appreciative of the work that we're able to do with the county and with our service agreement and the opportunity to have a space in the courthouse. So thank you for that. So our door is always open when we're there, and you feel free to reach out to any staff if you have any questions. So that's just a very quick snapshot of who we are and what the work is that we do.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hansel. And are there any questions that we have or any comments? Commissioner Hawkins.
The thing about the septic, so that's not a soil and water issue, that's a land services. So if I have questions, I should talk to Tim. Okay,
Yeah, yep. I know, and it's kind of confusing because in the past we used to run the loan program and the grant program. And so there was this confusion, and that got moved again off of our plate when we switched rules around. But we're not, because we don't do enforcement, it got really confusing with the community. And so they would call us. So we are glad we have just pushed that off our plate and said, it's not us. We don't do enforcement. You know, we can help with the water quality part, but yeah, it's all land services.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Commissioner Svallesen.
A statement, not a question, just a perfect example of achieving and engaged in a lot with them. So I really appreciate your efforts and, you know,
Commissioner
I'm sorry.
Svallesen, we're having trouble hearing you.
Yeah, thank you. I just statement, really appreciate what you're doing. It's a perfect example of achieving and working on a lot with a few. So really appreciate that effort and really want to continue to support you.
Any further comments or remarks, questions? Well, thank you so much for your thorough report. We really appreciate it. And thank you for all the good work that you do.
Thank you for your time.
All right. So last but not least with our presentations, Mr. Haas, we have a highway presentation looking at levy use.
I'm gonna get my screen sharing here. Thank you, appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
If I've overcome my technical issues from the last time. That look a little better?
Looks great.
Awesome. And we'll end it there. Looks great. No, I wanted to, this is, you know, kind of our next steps in this discussion. You know, developing our kind of long-term sustainable department plans, you know, based on our levy use. Quick recap. You know, I showed this figure last time, and we kind of dived more in depth on each of those red numbers there. You can see, you know, we broke down each category. I wanted to, you know, I kind of looked at each part and what's made up of them. And, you know, we kind of went over the county wage survey, you know, how do we compare, how does Cook County wages compare to the rest of the state? And, you know, we are at or below, you know, a lot of our counterparts. We looked at our kind of level of service, the gravel that we supply, the calcium chloride applications. We looked at the cost of repairs and parts, other services that we provide at the department as well. So you can see that kind of leaves us about $360,000 to split up between our equipment and roadway projects. So what I wanted to highlight first was kind of the location of our structural deficiencies. You know, before it's one thing to have a list, that doesn't mean much. So what this shows is every bridge in Cook County. A bridge is any structure 10 feet and over in this case. And so you can see all the highlighted structures there. They're spread out throughout the county. So this isn't just a central issue somewhere or one-off. The ones that are highlighted in blue are the only ones we actually have guaranteed money for. Again, these are levy-dependent structures. This isn't state aid funding. This is money paid through the levy, or bridges repaired and replaced through the levy. In this case, these two structures, Cross River up on County Road 46, and then the Carlson Creek Bridge on County Road 71 are utilizing our TST cash balance. So now what do we do? So we kind of want to sit here and look at everything. You know, we're peeling this thing apart. What are we getting into? You know, so we did a comprehensive analysis of the highway department and the county needs. Three things stuck out to us. There's kind of one additional thing here between equipment and roadway projects, and that's our fund balance. And I'll talk about that a little bit. Do we want to maintain our current level of service? Do we want to increase it? Do we want to decrease it? And then, you know, similar in a time frame too is, you know, how quickly do we want to replace our deficient structures? 5 years, 7 years. And a follow-up to that is, you know, what do we do after that? Can funding decrease? I would argue no. There's, you know, a list that got put together of projects when the TST fund was being developed a few years ago. And I think there was something like, you know, $100 million worth of county projects that we could do. Not saying we got to do them all, but, you know, it's just something as simple as getting to rebuilding gravel roads. We're not even talking about paving or making them fancy, just having nice roads. So another thing we'll get into is kind of the life cycle cost of equipment. Josh will dig into that here in a little bit. What's the cost of this whole plan eventually? And additional funding sources. You know, I mentioned our TST cash. There's grants, there's state bridge bonds, there's federal money. Can we rely on that? How much can we rely on that? It's something to consider. So I'm going to talk about our fund balance first. So it's kind of an odd thing. It's the cash that the highway department has on hand, if you will, particularly our undesignated fund balance. And that got set as a goal by the auditor's office. I think before Brady and I were talking about it a while ago, and it's just a healthy number to be at. And so they decided it should be about 60% of our operating costs. And so that goal balance then is about $2.4 million. We plan on using portions of that for our new salt sand shed that we have to construct next year, along with replacing our cold storage facility. And that's kind of this discussion and other discussions with facilities, but we can get into that, I guess, more so in facilities. But the fund balance really, you know, it's not just money that sits somewhere. We can use it for grant matching. So a lot of times when you apply for grants, it doesn't cover the whole project. You have to provide 10 to 20% maybe of the project cost. So you can see how that can get expensive pretty quick. Similarly, federally funded projects are reimbursements. So you have to front end the money until the federal government reimburses you. Again, you can see how that, you know, if a culvert costs $400,000, that eats up a big chunk of that pretty quick. Other items such as, you know, like I mentioned, our salt sand shed and cold storage, kind of those knee-jerk reaction type of things. And then, you know, what we've also used it for too is if the state is ever late in making maintenance allocation payments, we can front end that until the state can catch up. So next, Josh is going to go over our equipment plans, and I'll unshare this and let him hop on.
Hi everybody, give me 1 second to share screen here. Beginning. There we go. All right, so I'm going to just talk a little bit more about our equipment plans that we've been working on. Equipment is a big part of our capital improvement plan, and the funding portion of capital improvement, a lot of that goes to equipment, so that's why we're kind of calling it out separate, just to kind of give you an idea of where we're trying to go with equipment. Just to kind of recap a little bit from the last meeting, really our goal with all of this planning is to try and get things smooth and predictable for equipment spending. I mentioned last time that it was, you know, we were on a roller coaster where it sounds like the equipment was kind of let go for a long time, then a massive amount of replacement in a short time, big spending swings that we're trying to avoid. Last time I presented 3 different options just to kind of give you an idea of what each one might cost. You'll recall in 2014 was the last equipment plan that was approved. So I showed you what it might cost to get back to that, which was a lot of money. Then I kind of showed you also a mid-range plan, and then also a little bit more conservative plan where we just kind of do one of our large pieces of equipment once a year. We've talked to a lot of people regarding this plan, the mechanics, the operators, you know, the committee, the highway committee. I've talked to other agencies. We're really just trying to gather as much guidance as possible so we can kind of take this plan to the next step. And so really the proposal that I'm going to put forward for our equipment is kind of a compromise between all those factors. I mean, there's a lot to consider. The upfront cost obviously is kind of the biggest one and the easiest to predict, and at times the most shocking, of course, when you're making large purchases. Other factors we're considering are resale, reliability, repair costs, downtime during snow events. You know, it's one thing to have you know, a piece of equipment that breaks down and maybe it's not very expensive to fix, but we need that piece of equipment running on a certain day, you know, when it's snowing. So that's, you know, reliability is a real important factor for our operation too. So we're kind of looking at all of those issues here as we come up with a plan. So kind of where we're at now for our proposal is looking at moving our plow trucks to a replacement schedule of about 14 years, which aligns it with kind of a loose practice of MnDOT. I don't think they have a real hard and fast rule, but I've heard that 14 years is kind of their goal for plow trucks. With graders, it's a real expensive piece of equipment, but also one we need to keep reliable. So kind of a compromise we're looking at for those is maybe around 12 years. The mechanics would like to see even sooner, but we want to see if we can maybe push those out a little farther than 10 years of what they were looking for, just because it's such an expensive piece of equipment to replace. We're looking at probably using some lease to own still on the graders. I was trying to minimize that going into the future to save the money on the finance charges, but it would take such a large infusion of money up front to get us back on track in our equipment replacement fund to be able to buy those outright when they come due. So I think the first batch, we're probably looking at maybe 2 out of the 4 of them needing to do a lease to own. And then this next time that comes around, you know, quite a ways into the future, maybe just 1, depending on how the fund's looking by then. And then pickup trucks and 1-tons I'm pushing out quite a bit. You know, I think, I don't think it's unusual for, you know, somebody to expect 20 years out of a perfectly good pickup truck. And some of our heavy equipment is already at 30 years and still serving our needs. So really for big front end loaders, excavators, things like that, we're looking at probably around 30 years. There's a few smaller pieces of equipment like a skid steer and a mini excavator. Just because they're a little smaller, they kind of take a little more vibration, a little more of a beating. So I kind of move those up a little bit. I wanted to kind of show you how does that compare to some of the other, I guess, plans that have been out there so far. So I drew up just a quick illustration of what were they looking at in 2014 when that plan was approved. In the interim, Kristen, the previous engineer, was working on getting this plan set and didn't quite get to see it to completion, but I've given you the 2018 column there of kind of where she was going. And then the 2021 column is kind of the proposal we're putting forward. My current impression is, you know, that the 2014 plan was really focused on high reliability and high resale, but that comes with a lot of upfront costs. And I think to get back on track with that plan isn't currently something that I think we could fund. If you'll recall, it was approximately $2.3 million, I think it was, to get back on track with that plan. And that seems pretty hard to swallow. So I don't think that's a very practical approach. Obviously, the 2018 plan, you know, Kristen was pushing out the years a little bit, but also adding kind of a qualifier of this many miles or this many hours, in addition to kind of a minimum set of years, and then adding the statement of whichever is greater. I'm kind of going a little bit different direction with that. I've pushed the years out, and I'll talk a little bit further on a future slide of kind of a way of assessing how I want to assess to make sure that it's due for replacement. But I'm primarily sticking to age for funding so that we can predict it more, well, I guess to make it more predictable of when that's going to come due, rather than not really knowing for sure when a piece of equipment might reach a certain amount of miles or a certain number of hours. But we'll still certainly take that into account, and I'll mention that a little bit in the future slide. Why would we push it out? You know, if you saw, we're pushing it out pretty drastically on some points. Really, the reason is the cost. These things are very expensive, and I just don't think, compared to what we're spending right now, I don't think we can afford to enact the 2014 plan at this point, or to have that new of equipment. But of course, we want to make sure we keep our equipment reliable. So really, we're trying to find out what is a sustainable number? What's something that the board feels like they're comfortable funding? And so this is the plan that we're kind of putting out there to see what you think with it. The 2014 plan was really looking like they were around 600,000 per year roughly was kind of their goal. If you adjusted that for 2% inflation per year, that'd be up over 700,000 per year starting 2022. That seemed like maybe something that was too much. Like we're not going to be able to get back to that. And also, one of my main goals coming up with this was to avoid needing some sort of large cash infusion in the beginning. If you recall the 2014 plan, and then even like the mid-range scenario, both of those needed kind of a big chunk of money up front just to get on track. And I guess I didn't think that was a very practical way to go forward either. So really what we're kind of going with here is around $440,000 in 2022, and then increasing that by 2% each year going forward. Really, the tricky part with this is we want to make sure that we start at a number that the board's comfortable with, and see if you can commit to kind of sticking with the plan. Because really, you can see here, I put up kind of a projected graph of our equipment reserve fund, and we're starting out right around $150,000 in 2022 on hand, which isn't a lot for when you look at how much some of our equipment costs. And so we're kind of getting through that first decade, maintaining a balance, but not really growing that fund until we get through some of our equipment purchases. And then after that, it starts to grow. And we want to make sure that we're thinking of the future and we allow that fund to grow, so that when a lot of that heavy equipment comes due in the 2040s, it's something that we have the money on hand to be able to afford, rather than looking for emergency money. Currently, you can see it still does dip a hair below zero. I think by then we can adjust the plan as needed to compensate for that. I think our higher resale values in the future will help compensate for that, and it's far enough into the future that I think it'll be manageable. But really, kind of the point is we're not looking for a lot of extra money to just be sitting around, but we are trying to fund our plan sustainably for the future, so that when that heavy equipment comes, we have the money to afford it. We had a couple considerations come up in the Highway Committee that I wanted to make sure that we let them know that we're addressing those, and we're presenting this to the Highway Committee later this week as well. But one of the ideas was to look at a greater rehabilitation plan rather than replacing them. And unfortunately, I talked to both a John Deere dealer and our cat dealer, and neither of them really thought that was a financially wise choice. And really comes down to, because we already pay about a 33% discount on our graders compared to retail. And they told me that just the kind of the high cost of mechanic labor and how little not little, but how much less we pay than retail, that it wouldn't really save us very much money on just trying to fix them up. But one idea that did come up was possibly looking at purchasing some of the lease trade-ins from the city of Duluth. I forget the exact number, but they lease quite a number of graders just for snow plowing in winter. So they really don't see a lot of heavy work as far as in the gravel and rocks and whatnot, dust. So that might be a place where we'll look at some savings when it comes time to look at replacing our graders. But it will depend on really what's available. And another thing that came up was, that our equipment is too nice. As it seems like maybe especially our pickups kind of get some attention. Why are they quad cabs? Why do they have a high trim level? Things like that. And so I guess, I can't go back and change what was done in the past, or, I can't really question why they thought that was the right choice. All I could say is that, my goal will be to right size the truck to its task. So as a few examples, we're sending out our steamer truck today. A lot of times that'll have a crew of 3 or 4 people, a heavy water tank, the steamer itself, that's a point where we need to spend some money on a big truck that can handle the weight and has room for people. But other times, you know, we're looking at moving one person to and from their tractor for mowing. So that's a case where we'd probably look at something smaller and a little more inexpensive. So really trying to right size each piece of equipment to its task rather than just going with one standard vehicle. And, you know, we're really kind of looking for savings where we can find them. But I do want to point out, you know, we buy all of our equipment on the state contract, and the savings aren't necessarily as great as, you know, you might expect when you see, like most folks are expect to see a brand new truck costing a lot of money, you know, $60,000 or something. But really, for us, it's not. We're looking at more towards, you know, 30 to 35,000 for a pickup truck, and the cost difference between a 1/2 ton and a 3/4 ton, or a 150 to 250, if you will, it's only about $1,000. So if we can save $1,000, of course, that's great. I want to do that. But I also kind of want to point out that the impression is almost, it's kind of worse than the actual cost savings. You know, we'd be doing it so that we show people we're trying to save that money. Even if it is just $1,000, I want to save that, but it's not going to result in huge cost savings, you know, in the long run. So how will we determine once we hit this time frame if that piece of equipment really needs replacing? And really, we got this idea from Kristen, and I think it's a great one, and I want to run with it. It's from Dakota County, and I think she saw it at maybe one of the APWA conferences, the Public Works Association. And really, they've come up with an equation that kind of assigns points to different factors of the equipment, such as the age, the miles, the type of service. You know, how important is that piece of equipment? Is it a plow truck, or is it just kind of a spare pickup? And then taking a look too at the maintenance and repair costs. And I liked the line that they had in there, is that it kind of takes the emotion out of purchasing, right? Like we don't want to be spending money on a grader because we just don't like it anymore, or it looks old, or something like that. We want to make sure that we're really showing some accountability for our spending, and you know, giving the public and the board just something that they can look to show that it is time. We're doing our due diligence and trying to make sure that we're using our equipment to maximize its life and not replacing it just because it's due. So that's something we're going to look at. They do, of course, in Dakota County have 13 people working on their equipment choices. So I think our version will be a little bit of a pared down, but we're going to see what we can make work, and we'll come back with that once we're looking at some of these purchases. So really, you know, we're bringing all this back to the committee of the whole again, because we're looking for more feedback. You know, is 440,000 a good sustainable spot where we can start? Do you think, you know, consistently increasing that 2% to make up for inflation going into the future is something that the board can support? That's what we're kind of looking to hear. You know, is that too much? Is it too little? And of course, you know, we'll be revising our plans as we go forward. We're really just looking for a solid starting point. In a few years, if our repair budget's going through the roof, of course, we want to, you know, keep this flexible and make changes as need be. So with that, Robbie's going to come back with some more kind of funding for roadway, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah.
I'm happy you're talking about that and not me. All right, give me a second to get this thing going. All right, so like Josh mentioned, we'll talk about some roadway projects, and then we're going to get kind of number heavy on some pages. So bear with me. We'll go over it, and then obviously, like Josh said, have some time for discussion. So right now, this is kind of what's on the plate as far as levy-dependent bridges for the next couple of years. You can see the two projects in 2021 that I had mentioned, Cross River and Carlson Creek. In 2022, I put 3 on, Junco Creek, Alfred Creek, and Sawbill Creek. We have a couple of grants out right now for Junco Creek, whether we get one or the other. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. And similarly, I put in applications for state bridge bonds for Alfred Creek and Sawbill Creek. The hard part with the state bridge bonds is because the plans for those aren't done. We're kind of on the bottom of the list. We are going over a couple of RFPs, requests for proposals that we put out to consultants to do the design work. And I have to review those, but those will be done for Alfred Creek and Sawbill Creek as well. Lastly, the Flute Reed River Bridge there in 2023, we were awarded some federal money for that one. That requires, I think it's a 20% match. So I put in for bridge bonds for that one, but if we don't get that, then obviously that comes back to coming up with it somewhere else. I wanted to kind of stick with this schedule as best I could in coming up with these kind of plans for the couple of timeframes I'm going to suggest. So the next few slides are going to be variations of this. And so I'll go over this. We can cruise through it. And then this is a 5-year replacement plan for our deficient structures. And this is saying that we are getting all of our outside funds. So we get all the bridge bonds we ask for, we get all the grants we ask for, federal money, we get all of that. So you can see each of the projects listed there, the year that I have them scheduled for replacement, and the associated cost with that project. Beneath that, you can see the different types of kind of outside funds, the TST funds, grants, bridge bonds, federal money. The total line, the total row is kind of what's left over. And then you can see the cost per year. So starting in 2022, for this particular plan, just for projects, we would need $650,000. That increases each year with inflation. And then you can see the project account there. I wanted to keep, my goal with the project account was to keep it right around $200,000 as a minimum. So you can see we kind of hit that in a couple of years. What this means is, that kind of accounts for ebbs and flows in project cost. Also, you can see, as the fund grows, we can do more work. So I had mentioned reconstructing roads as an example. On the very bottom of that left table, you can see the fund balance. I had that being recouped, to that 2.4 million we had discussed over this same 5-year time frame. So if you look at the right table now, you can see the equipment plan we have is $440,000. We have projects starting at $650,000. I added 2 additional things, large culverts and ditching, and then striping and signs. There's culverts in between kind of this that aren't on our bridge inventory, but they're still big. Culverts between 4 and 10 feet in size. That's still quite a large project. It's quite a large undertaking. It's not quite a bridge. And so, but the materials associated with that is worth noting. And so I wanted to include that in here so we have our picture. Similarly, striping and signs, I wanted to make sure we could account for that. You can see our fund balance included in there. So in total, you can see the cost of this particular plan is about $1.4 million. So what this plan would propose is right now we have $360,000 to spend on all of this. So we would need an additional little under 1.1 million. Now, same information, but now we'll just say some outside funds. I wanted to do this to show kind of the difference, like what happens if we don't get bridge bonds, for example. What's that look like? Equipment stays the same, the fund balance stays the same, kind of those bigger, not quite bridge culverts, striping and signs, all that stays the same. But you can see what changes is obviously the project cost. Even shifting around the schedule a bit, if I go back a slide, you can see just bumping some projects around, pushing them out a little bit more to try and keep that cost down. So you can see even if we don't get bridge funds, now that additional funding, we're looking at about 1.2 million. Again, this is over a 5-year time span. So ignore all of the outside funds. What happens if we don't get anything? Again, you can see the projects getting pushed out further. The TST cash is there. And so that's something I wanted to keep included. So again, you can see the additional funds, a little under 1.5 million. Now we get fancy. 5-year plan, but we'll split it up over a couple of years, including all of our outside funds. Obviously, there's a million scenarios with this kind of stuff, but I just wanted to try and highlight, kind of what are we looking at? And so I tried to keep our schedule the same as the original one. Again, this is including all of our outside funds, grants, bridge bonds, federal dollars. And say we split it up over 2 years, what's it looking like? And so you can see in 2022, we would need an additional $520,000 to cover equipment and projects. And then the other items, the fund balance, kind of those bigger culverts and the striping stuff, and then to even pick up some of the additional project funding, can get pushed till 2023. And now you're looking at, so you kind of spread out that cost a little bit. Another example, if we ignored bridge bonding, same idea, splitting up the cost a little bit, what's that look like? Rough summary of our 5-year plans. 5-year plans meaning this is what it would take to replace our structurally deficient bridges in 5 years. You can see, generally speaking, anywhere from $1 to $1.3 million is what it would take. And then that sum is what would keep rolling forward, as Josh mentioned, increasing with inflation. So what I wanted to do is, that seemed aggressive. And so I said, all right, what's 7 years look like? So same scenario, same ideas, but over 7 years. We don't need to go, I can show you the tables if you want a separate time, but this is the gist of it. You can see, obviously, your total cost comes down. Now you're in the $800 to $1 million range. And then pushing it out more, a 9-year plan. This replaces this. Essentially, it's kind of like a 1 a year type of plan with this one for replacing our deficient structures. You can see this brings it down the most, between $630,000 and $900,000, somewhere in there. So, plans. That was a lot of plans. It's a lot of information. These are very much not set in stone. This is a very large discussion. It's kind of complicated. It's got a ton of moving parts. But I really feel like if we do this right and we put the time and the effort into this now, we shouldn't have to re-examine it again at this type of scale. This is a big scale. We're not talking about being kind of sort of underfunded. This is massive. If we do this right and we do this now, projects are going to be funded, equipment is funded, a level of service stays the same, maybe even has some room to increase. We go from being the worst in state to our sufficiency ratings to on par and the best. I really want this exercise to be an example of how cooperation, frank discussion, and open communication between our elected officials, our local departments, and the public can figure out, how we can all come together and figure out these complicated problems and put in place some long-term sustainable plans. And that is the end of that. Obviously, we're going to open this up for some conversation now. So if you have any questions or comments, we are more than happy to answer them.
Well, I'd like to thank you for all the different scenarios that you've provided so that we have a multiple frames to look at, because it's a very complex issue and a very important issue. And a question I happen to have is, as you're looking at pushing things out to 7 years or 9 years, what about those deficient structures? What potential do we have for the state in taking some rather negative action upon our deficient structures?
Sure. That's funny you mentioned that, because I got a phone call from Kristen the other day, who was, for those, she was our former engineer we were in joint with Lake County. She's at the state now, and she said she was getting some concerned phone calls from people up here based on our last presentation. And that's fair. That's fair. It's we are a ways away from that happening. We are far enough where any of these plans that would not be an issue. The state works with us to fix these things. They provide our oversight to make sure we are doing our job, in maintaining our infrastructure. So this isn't something where, because we wait 2 years, they're going to come in and close all of our roads. It is a possibility. If we do nothing, that is a possibility then. And so that's why I feel like getting on board with this now, getting ahead of some of these deficient structures, that conversation doesn't have to occur.
Thank you. And thank you for reaching out and talking to her so that we have a good understanding between our entities.
Absolutely.
Other questions or comments? Commissioner Svallesen.
Yeah, again, great discussion. I appreciate all the hard work that you guys have put in. This is exactly what we need to do, to dig into it and really lay it out there so we can make the decisions, even if they're hard decisions. That's okay. A couple of questions for you to go along with the chairman's question. So your current analysis right now would tell us that even the deficient bridges, with the rate of work that you're going to do, even considering the 9-year plan, that we would be okay.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that, that's, and I understand that can change as you move forward, and we're always going to be able to adjust as we need to. A couple of other questions. When you look at, just for my edification, your shop expenses, that's basically parts and it's applied time to do the work that you're doing in the shop?
Yeah, there's, I should have brought it up. I knew you would have past questions. Yeah, I had a breakdown before.
Oh, okay. Sorry, then I can go back and look.
No. You're totally fine. I got it right. The benefits of being kind of sort of organized. So shop expenses it's our personnel. So wages, benefits, and unemployment, equipment and property insurance. There's a couple other services and charges, utilities, fuel, and parts and supplies.
Got it. Okay, that's good.
Do you want me to show? I can show you the table right now if you want.
Nope, not necessary. Thank you. Now, Josh told us that he was using an equipment, on the equipment, he was using a 2% inflation rate. Were you using a similar inflation rate for yours?
For construction, I've always been accustomed to using 4. I think it presents a conservative number then. Obviously, this is part of the discussion. We can adjust, whatever. I think what I wanted to get out of this was kind of the general cost associated with these different timeframes. We can obviously, have a conversation about what we think of an appropriate inflation number is when we, start to hammer this down more. But I think, right now, just coming forward with kind of, all right, $440,000 a year for equipment based on 2% inflation. I say a whole plan, maybe over 7 years, we're looking at $1 million in addition to what we already have. So, and it ebbs and flows with what we end up deciding to do. Maybe we can split up these costs over 3 years, 4 years, I'm not sure.
I understand. And I have one more question. That's for Josh. You're looking at a 2% inflation rate, but my question is specific to when you've looked at equipment cost inflation. In other words, the rising cost, does that work for the equipment cost? In other words, the escalation, is that showing that 2% would cover that normally?
Yeah, so I incorporated that into the plan and so that we would be able to cover it going into the future. One of the things that Robbie and I talked about, I think of almost him needing to create a little bit more wiggle room, I guess I'd say, because big projects like his aren't as predictable. All of our equipment costs, I can dig into the state bid and find you a hard cost today. Here's what that truck will cost.
Right.
So I feel like I'm able to kind of tighten up the plan a little bit. Like I know for sure this is what this costs today. More unpredictably is kind of what our resales will look like in the future.
Right.
But they should obviously increase, I would hope. But so that's why I think I went with a little bit more conservative inflation number, because I can come up with real hard starting point, whereas the projects are a little more loose as to how you would estimate what those are going to cost. So I think that's why we were thinking a little bit more inflation for his projects.
Yeah, and I understand you don't do contingency on your equipment part where Robbie needs to do contingency on the big projects. So I understand it. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's my questions.
Other questions or comments?
Yeah, I'm wondering about the service costs, and are you going to do a report about the services that are being provided and their costs and alternatives if we change the level of service?
Service cut. Oh, you mean like calcium chloride?
Yeah.
Well, that's part of this discussion. What would you like me to do? Obviously there was, I forget what year it was a few years ago though, the highway department cut calcium chloride, and then you could see it the following year get added right back. So I think, I'm just, so, it's kind of one of those, I can make a million different plans. And I think just based on, kind of what the input is from the board at this point, like I had mentioned, what we had put forward right now is additional funds maintaining the current level of service. So I guess to kind of answer your question, if we cut calcium chloride, well, cut all my costs by $200,000 then. That's kind of how I look at it right now, is something like that. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was thinking something. I just know the community right now is having a hard time with levy increases every year. And yeah, $1 million. I just looking for what else can we do? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And that's why Josh and I wanted to start this conversation now and be as transparent as possible as we can with it. I mean, graders cost $400,000. Culverts cost on average $350 to $400,000. I mean, these aren't magical fake numbers we're making up. It's just kind of, this is what it takes. And when we, started to dig into this stuff, more, and we come in and our job is to make plans, be boring. Like I want to come to you with a status update that's like, hey, we did a bunch of construction and the county's in better shape. That's my goal. But unfortunately, when we start diving into things and we go, we have $360,000 to split up between these two incredibly expensive line items, we're going, well, okay, now what? And so I think ultimately it's up to the board, if you say, okay, figure it out, then that's what we have to do. And we're stuck with what we got. I obviously hope that doesn't happen, but I understand the constraints, the county is under and everybody is under, especially, pandemic. But yeah, these are our proposals coming forward. Nothing is set in stone. This is just kind of an idea of what, this type of stuff costs.
Can I add to that, just as far as in maintenance, a lot of the fluff, my impression, has already been cut. I mean, we don't even have any money this year to put stripes on roads. I mean, that's a pretty basic thing that we should be doing. I mean, if we were looking to cut more, you'd be to the point to where we just don't buy any asphalt for this year, or we just don't buy any signs. I mean, I'm sure you've seen plenty of our signs don't even have any reflectivity right now. We'd have to look at things like maybe we just don't plow on Sundays anymore, or we don't grade anymore on the weekends when the gravel is ideal for grading. I mean, that's kind of the point, at least from my perspective in maintenance, that we're at. We're not spending a ton of money right now on extras. We're really pretty baseline.
Well, thank you for presenting all this information. Administrator Yorkie, you have a question?
Not a question, but just a comment. I just want to thank Robbie and Josh, and also Lisa Sorley, who's done a lot of the work helping us crunch the numbers. I think what they're laying out in terms of these different scenarios is really thoughtful. And I think, you know, we're in the position we are now because for many years we have kind of kicked the can down the road on a lot of these maintenance projects. And it's led to a situation where we are among our peer counties the worst in terms of bridge maintenance. And that's, you know, that's not okay. And I get that this stuff costs a lot of money. But at a minimum, we need to have safe infrastructure for our residents. That's just basic. I mean, it's not a luxury. It's something that we have to have. And, you know, I do not envy you board members, you commissioners, for having to make these decisions, because this is one of those kinds of things that make me feel certain I will never run for public office. It's a really, really hard position to be in. But, you know, like I said, these are basic things that county government has to do. And it's going to be a tough conversation, but we need to have a plan that, like Robbie said, is sustainable over the long term. And that creates predictability in terms of how we're funding these projects, so that we're not looking at, you know, 7-figure levy increases in the future. So I just want to thank the highway team, Robbie, Josh, Lisa, and Randy and Steve in the shop and other folks. A lot of folks have really put work into this to help us start having this conversation. And I think they're doing a great job, and I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question. So at this point, you know, we kind of have a bunch of these scenarios out there, different timeframes, different costs. Commissioner Hawkins had mentioned, you know, cutting service. What's that look like? You know, at this point, what would you like us to do? You know, like to focus on, you know, is it easy enough to say, you know, a 5-year replacement plan is just like, no, like don't even bother looking at trying to replace all of our deficient structures in 5 years. You know, is it something to be like, we're pretty confident and leaning towards a longer one? 7, you know, I don't know, but to me, that kind of time frame is what really affects these costs a lot. You know, you saw it in just the couple scenarios I presented. I think, you know, 9-year scenario is under $1 million, and the 5-year, everything was up and over it. So I think for us, it's kind of, you know, we can keep planning and tweaking. You know, I think what was nice from the first one to this one was kind of here's how the levy works. Here's everything broken down. Here's now, you know, if we do start coming up with plans, here's some scenarios where, you know, how much everything costs. Is there anything you would like us to focus on? So the next month we can come back, because I want to keep this going, you know, while we're in it.
Commissioner Yorkie?
Oh, I've been promoted. Yay. No, administrator.
Oh my gosh. Sorry.
Or demoted. I'm not sure what you did.
You said you didn't want to be an elected official, so Administrator Yorkie.
No,
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. I thought I had unmuted. Anyway, you know, you've received a lot of information today. One thing I would note is, you know, our 2022 budget cycle planning is going to be starting very soon. And what I would suggest is maybe the 3 of you take this information and chew on it for a while. We have the other 2 commissioners who are not here today. I think Robbie's exactly right. We need to continue this conversation. This is not something we can just put on the back burner and hope that we come back to it at some point in the distant future. But with the next budget cycle starting up here pretty quickly, we're going to have these conversations. And so what I would say for today's purposes is just, you know, contemplate what you've heard today. I think we need to continue having this discussion at future business meetings. and let this information that the highway team has put together inform our conversations about next year's budget and a long-term plan for financing our infrastructure needs.
Thank you for that. We appreciate it. Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move on to our next item, which is just information. We have minutes for the Personnel Committee and the Building Committee. Any comments? Commissioner Hawkins.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the Building Committee, and it looks like we have kind of the same issues happening there that we're having happening over at the Highway Department, and I'm wondering what the plan is to address those issues.
Funny you should ask. So yes, we have exactly the same kinds of issues in terms of the history of investing or not investing in buildings and where that has put us today. I am working on a presentation for next month's Committee of the Whole that will provide an overview of where we are in terms of the current state of our buildings. Also look back at some of the information that we've gathered over the last few years. We have done an assessment of our current inventory of buildings. And, right now, I guess what I would say, Commissioner Hawkins, is I feel like our building staff has been working very much in a reactive mode. And that's not where you want to be. You want to be proactive. You want predictability. You want certainty. You want to have, mechanical system replacement schedules, et cetera. And so that's something that we have a great need for. And for next month's Committee of the Whole, I'll be doing a presentation on that, and we'll dig into that as we have with the highway information today.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? If not, I'd like to thank all the commissioners and all our presenters, Attorney Hicken, Treasurer Powers, everyone for a great meeting. And thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.